Have you had questions about infidelity and separation in the twin flame connection? Hey everybody, I'm Dove.
I'm Nicole.
And we're Twin Flame Revolution. We are conscious as mentors, motivational speakers, energy healers and alchemists, and we're also a twin flame couple that's been in union for 11 years now. We came to you today to answer some of your questions about infidelity, separation, and things that you guys have been wanting to know. Today's gonna be a little bit of a different video. We are gonna have our amazing executive assistant, BFF, and overall awesome being that's gonna be asking us some questions that are really coming from you guys. This is a personal video, it's an intimate video, but we hope that it brings you some clarity and some assistance in the process. If this video resonates for you and you're brand new to us, please make sure to like or follow or subscribe depending on where you're seeing this video so that we can create the biggest community that we possibly can here and continue to serve you at the highest level that we can.
Amazing. So I first want to say thank you for showing up for this video because this is a heavily requested video via email. And I know that your followers are going to be really excited to see and dive in with you. So we're going to start off talking to Nicole first. So I want to hear from you what personally led up to having an affair. Like what were some major points that got you to that point?
So at the time, Dove and I were in some pretty deep relationship cycles that we didn't have the information or the tools to navigate. And it became really hard. And so my addiction has taken many forms. And so it's not just about drugs or alcohol. There was attention, there was addiction to worry, there was addiction to women in my story, in my life. And so what happened was I was in treatment and I was really making a decision to get clean. And I felt like the relationship at the time and the cycle was so toxic that I needed to pull away. I didn't have the tools to do that. I didn't have the communication that I have with Dove as of now. And so my MO in the past was to blow shit up. That's the way I dealt with my life. I'm like, if I need to make a correction, let's just blow the whole thing up. And it was my way of dealing with it. Not dealing with it. And so, you know, I get clean and I am working on myself and I'm going through this hard part of our relationship and we didn't have the understanding that we do now of who we are to each other and what we came to do. And so what started to happen was I started to use something else other than drugs and alcohol. And so my addiction kicked in. And so, you know, I thought it was a good idea to find somebody else. I rationalized what I was doing because of the toxicity of my relationship. I, you know, told myself that, you know, I'm not getting what I need here, so it's okay. None of those things were okay. Why are they not okay? They're not okay with me now. The person that I am now is committed in a committed relationship. I've always been monogamous. I've always, deep down in my heart, like the true me. And so that's basically how I created the separation from Dove, was to blow things up. And the thing is that I was still seeking outside of myself for something that only I could give myself, right? I was still seeking that kind of peace or, you know, gratification or ecstasy or joy or, you know, attention and all of these things that I hadn't given myself. And so, you know, that can only work for so long when we start reaching outside of ourselves, and especially when it's in a way of an affair is very much around addiction, because there is lying, there is hiding, there is adrenaline, there's dopamine boost. You are, you know, doing something wrong. And there was a lot that it gave me at the time to divert me from my pain. To divert me from having to really face those deep wounded things that were like underneath at that time. There was things underneath there that I didn't even know were there, that were causing me, you know, symptomatically to reach outside myself to protect myself or to make myself feel something. And so I wasn't there yet. I wasn't there and I didn't have those things. And so this was my way of coping. Also, I couldn't understand how I could love someone so much and also like hate her so much, because I was so mad that I had to look at myself and I couldn't. And I really went into so much guilt and shame for not being able to look at myself like fearlessly and to take responsibility for my whole life and everything that I had created. I couldn't do that. And so I ran. And I ran to this woman, and, you know, I stayed clean off of drugs for a while. And then all of a sudden, I relapsed, because when you pick up anything as an addict, it doesn't have to be, and you're continuously using something, you're probably going to go back to your drug of choice. You're probably going to go back to that main jammy jam. You're probably going to go back to the first thing that really made you feel good and made you get out of yourself. And so, you know, for me, it was that having to really look at myself, and, you know, the constant battle that we were going through being in the same space when we had that time apart was when I finally got to see things as they were, and I got to see more about myself and the things that I didn't really like about myself either, the things that were blocking me from having everything that I wanted. And mind you, this was hard. All of it was really painful. It was painful to not be able to be this soul that I know I am now. It was so painful to feel so far away from that, and to think that I wasn't going to have that, and that I wasn't going to be able to look at myself in the mirror, and that I wasn't going to be able to have the things that I wanted with her or in my life. It was very painful to be running so much from myself. That was more painful than it was always more painful than having to face myself. It's way less painful to actually face yourself and walk through it.
Thank you. I wanted to tell you guys too, I heard some of your questions coming into my mind, and if some of you guys are brand new to us and you're not familiar with our story, or how it's possible that people that love each other or twins or anything could go through some of the things that we're going to talk about today, like separation and infidelity, is something we're going to be focused on quite a bit, because that's a lot of your questions. You can watch the video, The Dirty Truth About Twin Flames. So you could watch our raws on YouTube, things like that. You'll gain more perspective of our story. So if you're brand new and this is the first video you're coming into of ours, welcome, and allow yourself to also get some backstory from a multitude of our videos on YouTube, the ones I mentioned, as well as some Facebook videos where we do talk pretty openly about our story, because that's our point of being able to access and assist you. So we've been through a lot, the two of us, and all of those difficulties have really, at least for our personal story, mission, and purpose, have allowed us to help anyone really to release themselves from their core, their wounds, their traumas, their experiences, to get to a place that feels empowered, a state of love, a state of connectedness. So for some of you, this might be brand new information. So just wanted to give you that caveat as you can follow us through here. You might need some backstory.
Perfect. Dove, how did you handle coming into this space and finding out Nicole was having an affair, and where were you at during that?
So the really interesting thing that I think I've said before about this time and space of this affair is that I received this information really far in advance intuitively. You know, I felt it before anything happened. I started seeing things, and for me, one of the major aspects about this, and major aspect of the experience, and actually something that brought me a lot of growth and a lot of blessing, is that I started to anchor into trusting myself through my feelings, through my intuition. And it led me to a concept that I internalized within myself, and now I teach others to really understand how to navigate and assess and connect with their alignment and their intuition. And so for me, I went through this part where I really resisted believing any of what was happening. I was told by anybody that I spoke to that this wasn't happening, that I was crazy, and actually pushing myself to believe those things brought me into a state where I actually thought I was having a nervous breakdown, that I had to be on anxiety medication, all of these different things, because it was so much. But really what it was just this lack of ability that I was giving myself to just say, this is what's going on, like it or not. And in the moment that I pivoted into this is what's going on, even though it was painful, it reduced some of those symptoms greatly, just being able to be in truth with myself. Now, there is an aspect of, the finding out. There was lots and lots of signs and symptoms, and it got so drastic that then I started also going into a little bit of denial, where there is an aspect of you that doesn't want to acknowledge what you already know, because it's sort of that nail in the coffin, and that moment that you don't want it. You don't want that confirmation from somebody else. It's the thing you fear. But it felt important for me not only to get the information, but to get the information in a way that I could understand. Because for me, understanding why we have the experiences we do is really important. So I had just a multitude of facts and information to know that I was right. I waited till I had everything, and really I could have had the conversation months prior, but I did just lay all the facts down and create a really safe container that was full of respect for Nicole to share where she was at, what was her truth at the moment, why she was in that situation. And that was also a really awesome experience for me in terms of seeing what we all can handle and how we can really engage with people, no matter how painful that engagement is, with a lot of love and respect. And that was a really pivotal communication moment for me. And it doesn't mean it didn't impact me. It was brutal and it was painful and it caused me to feel physically sick. And I went through a lot of really scary, isolated moments after realizing that information. You know, I didn't right away get the support that I needed. I didn't right away, and I just mean in like the weeks after. So there was a lot of isolation that happened, which left me with my thoughts, which was a really dangerous place because I went with a lot of story and, you know, all of that. But I would say that, you know, the whole process, which is another perspective, that despite all of the pain, all of these things we choose in our lives to really design in a lot of understanding. So I can actually say that not as like, oh, I understand, you know, that I had that accident so that I would be a better person, but really truly like understand why I called that in, what it brought to my attention, what it allowed me to learn, you know, and so that's part and parcel of why we can have a loving situation and still have non-loving acts and behaviors, you know, and also because we all are working towards this deeper space of loving ourselves and loving others, right? We can only love to the capacity we can love ourselves. And so we're not at this perfect 100% state. Most people are not, I should say. And, you know, that's going to lead to those cracks and behaviors. And it doesn't mean that it's not a loving situation or a loving person or a good person when we have non-loving acts, right? And so that was a big process. And there's a lot to say there. And also a big part of the process for me that's a little outside of the question was really understanding how not personal the whole thing was, which is something that really took me a long time to understand.
I do want to just add one thing because I was thinking that when Dove sat me down and, you know, stated all the facts that she had witnessed, you know, down to, you know, my phone bill to not coming home or different things. It was interesting because she did it in such a loving way and just opened the space for me to be honest. And I want to talk about honesty because when I was little, I was a very honest kid, like to the point where my brothers would just be like, you're saying too much, right? And with my addiction though, I began to learn how to lie to cover up what I was doing, lie to cover up the pain, lie to protect self. And then it was just like, I didn't want to show people what I was doing or what was happening because I thought I would be judged, and I was judged, right? There's so much stuff around addiction. And so it was that moment when she sat me down that she blasted that part of me open where I could like, I could be honest, and it felt so good, right? And at the moment she got relief, and then reality hit of what the situation was and what we were gonna have to go through, and then all the mourning and the grief and the pain and the having to deal with each other's energy hit. But in that moment of being honest, right, breaking the cycle of the dishonesty, breaking the cycle of blowing everything up, breaking the cycle for me of not facing my life. Something happened in that moment, and that started a very huge and long process, years of needing to be more honest and learn how to communicate with each other. And it really cracked the door open to that and how important it was, and that there was like something there. When we hide and we're not honest, it's destructive. We emotionally hijack people. We don't, you know, we take hostages in that because, you know, it doesn't allow for this free flow of existence. And the other person's feeling the truth more than your shit, right? More than your lies. And it makes people feel nuts. And that was a piece that made my heart hurt when Dove shared that with me, that like, it was the dishonesty more than me cheating. Yeah. The dishonesty was what hurt her more, that I wasn't honest with her and couldn't come to her and say like, I'm having feelings or whatever was going on, or I was struggling. And then that began the whole getting honest with self, getting honest with her, getting honest with all kinds of stuff, right? So it's got to start somewhere, that honesty. It's very important to your ascension. It's important to your journey. It's important to have a solid relationship with whoever you decide to have a relationship with, and not even just relationships and romantic relationships, friendships. It's important.
Absolutely.
So when you came into the conversation, or let's say post-conversation, so you've had the conversation of, yes, you're having an affair and you have these moments of honesty. And then you decided to take some space to heal and work on whatever needed to happen. Did you see each other? Did you block each other? Did you find coaches, mentors? And a lot of the questions that come from your followers in this
all
space,
that, right?
in a certain order.
Yeah.
Is, this has happened and I want to see them, or I want to talk to them. Am I wrong? Is it okay to do this? So these are constantly questions that are coming up. So in your process, what did that look like after this conversation?
So in our process, we were in a breakdown cycle after that, where there wasn't as much desire from Nicole to kind of make it work, but there was some cooperation to take some time. So yes to all the things that, you just asked. We started with taking some non-communication time, where we separated out of the house together. We gave space, we had non-communication time. One of the things that wasn't so positive is that the parameters of that agreement were not super clear to both parties. So what Nicole thought and what I thought on the other side of that time of separation wasn't clear. And so, it's very important to kind of get some clarity on where both people, what the expectations are and what's going on. And so we started with that. And, interestingly, it was very hard for me to not have the communication. Nicole can speak for herself, but did kind of reach out still about non-related things like the dogs or things like that, or dog at the time, we didn't have both, connecting with me during that time. And then, in going forward after that, I solicited the support of mentors pretty shortly after I realized that the separation was going to kind of stick. It felt really important to me. I did have I had regular coaches and regular therapists prior to that, and then I really realized that this was going to be something specialized and I needed a specific type of support, really relating to energy and understanding deeper things. And it spurred a really deep growth and ascension process and time for me. And it's a really good question about, is it wrong? Is it right? Is it, one of the really difficult questions around your connection with other people is that, especially if it's a deep soul connection, especially if it's a complicated situation, it requires a lot of self-responsibility and alignment towards your heart and intuition.
Yes.
So it comes against a lot of what's taught or rational, reasonable, all of those things. And so as I trained myself to listen to my energetics, right? Sometimes I had to pick between hard and worse, bad and terrible, and really find these places where I could get more and more aligned with the decisions. So for me, it felt good to still have contact, to still see each other. We were pulled towards each other quite a bit. We still saw each other through a lot of the separation. We had pockets of time where we didn't. But I think that for both of us, it felt rejuvenating to be able to be in each other's space, even for a brief moment. It was not possible for a little bit. Our cycle had gotten bad enough that if we were in each other's physical space, it would kind of just end in some sort of explosion. It wasn't, we couldn't, what we didn't know at the time is that the wounds and the stories and everything had the polarity. We're talking about twins, but all people have polarity, right? We push polarity against each other, and it was just so bad that we essentially became like allergic. Everything was reversed, and we weren't able to. It's a split again with that intuition, right? So the spirit wants the connection, so it's pushing the connection, and then all the wounds and everything else want to repel. And so it creates that internal schizophrenia where it's like, I want to connect, but when I try, it just feels bad and it blows up, and then I want to connect, and then I try and it feels bad. And so that kind of is, that untreated energy, which I didn't understand at the time. And so we kind of did a little bit of everything, but what I found is that it was quite a difficult time because, you know, even in the face of sometimes Nicole saying, you know, I don't want to talk to you, you're crazy, we're gonna get a divorce, all of those things, I had to really find what was true for me, listen to my guides, listen to my connection, anchor into myself, take care of myself, find deeper respect for myself, right? Because we're never talking about you not caring for yourself, not making yourself number one, not, you know, accepting inappropriate behavior. We say this all the time, like not to accept inappropriate behavior just because you have an idea. And the interesting thing is at this point, Nicole and I didn't have an idea, because up until probably somewhere halfway through our separation, not even halfway through our relationship, our separation, we were not even aware of what our connection was. We didn't have stories, we didn't have attachment, we didn't have the twin flame concept, we didn't have the twin flame label. So for us, it was really about just anchoring into, you know, a simple truth. And even when I did find out about the twin flame concept, it was such a non-complicated process. It was like, I found out, I was like, I hope that's not who we are. That sounds like a lot of growth. I was like already tired at the time. Then, you know, when we both anchored into what it was, it never was the reason, the cause, the excuse, or the story. No. Right? So it's like, you know, and we're going to make another video talking about that. It's like, the concept is not the excuse for things. The concept is not the reason for things. The concept is to bring clarity to things, right? And so the reason that I knew Nicole and I were not complete is because Nicole and I had things to do here. Because Nicole and I had agreed to do those things as souls. Not because Source had agreed to do it, not because God, not because, you know, we agreed. And it felt incomplete. And I felt that in my being. And I knew that there was something there. You know, and it was necessary for me to not have had those concepts at the time so that I was able to share this information, so that I was able to understand. And so really the concept, you know, was then introduced to me, and I used that really as an understanding point. Okay, that makes sense. Now I understand, because if I could understand what we were going through, it gave me more tools and ability to be in the process. And so what I would say to you is, I lost a lot of friends in the process. I had a lot of judgment, I had a lot of story, a lot of shame. You know, in the 7 Twin Flame Master Keys, we talk about, in the separation segment, in the key, we talk about, you know, what it looked like, you know, or maybe one of the other ones. I remember talking about what it looked like, how you have to find your truth, and also how you have to protect your truth sometimes by not necessarily posting your frustration to all of your friends and family, because people love you, and then sometimes when they don't understand, it can create some resistance and confusion. So I did get myself to the point where I found my truth and I stood in it, and I found a stable place. You know, I did it in a messy way because I didn't understand. And so, you know, friends walked away, family members walked away, they felt frustrated by the dynamic. But anytime I would try to go with them in the story, I would start going back into this really deep panic and this really deep breakdown. And I realized that in order for me to be in truth with myself, forget the outcome, forget the story, forget the idea, in order for me to be in alignment with myself, being in a state of prosperity, being healthier, being more peaceful, being able to sleep at night, which was hard, I had to be honest with myself about what it is that I was feeling and what I was receiving.
Oh, wow. So let's talk about my side. You know, what Dove and I had to go through was, it definitely created a very, before we separated, it created and I don't like to throw this word around, but I'm going to use it for this instance because it was that way. It was a very codependent relationship in the sense that we were struggling with my addiction together as a whole, and not many people were very supportive, and the stigma was there, and it was like we kind of had to keep it in the house because it was like allowing any outside stuff coming in would cause more havoc. It would cause more thoughts on us, and we were in this position. We created this cycle. And so when I started to get clean again, because I've had many times where I got clean, started to get clean again, what I started to do was build my life up in a way where I was in outpatient care, and I was getting really good, like therapy, really good stuff, right? And I was going to the gym again, and I was working out, and I was going past all my wounding around, you know, being an athlete. And what started to happen was I started to have that feeling of my autonomy and strength, and then all of a sudden I want to say it felt like, when I look back, like what a midlife crisis would feel like, because I felt like this freedom that I had never had. And I had such stories at this point about our relationship because I was making stories and creating stories from wounds that we had with each other and like things that hadn't been healed. And so I was creating all these mountains of stories that weren't necessarily true. They weren't true. They were just stories from what we were working with. It was all I knew. And so I was like, ew, this is bad for me. And so when I finally left, it was very interesting because I had these things that I was doing. I was building a tribe and I was going to the gym and I was, I ended up getting a life coach. And while this was happening, before I ever even, sat with a life coach, Dove was working with coaches, and she was changing. And so as I was going through all this positive stuff, there was also the using another woman. And there was also like, after I put the drugs and alcohol down, I don't talk about this much, but you guys do know this, I had an eating disorder and that started to come up. The way I viewed my body, and I was having issues with food again. And so when I look at pictures of me from that time that I thought I was having a great time because my life seemed very full and it was very new in that way, when you looked at my face and you looked at my skin and you looked at my eyes, I looked like I was using drugs. And I wasn't. I looked sick because I was out of alignment and I couldn't see it because there was so much excitement in my life and there was so much new that it felt kind of like I was okay. But what started to happen was she started to change a lot, and all those stories that I made up about us, they started to crumble a little bit. And I kept getting pulled there and I kept getting pulled, and I started to see the depth of us. Like I was visualizing the depth that I couldn't have with anyone else. The depth of I was feeling the polarity. I was feeling it. I was feeling like this pull to her, and I was like, I was with somebody else, but like it was her birthday and I felt like led to have to show up for her birthday and go to dinner with her and like pull. And like there were times where like we were still best friends at times, like where like I would go through things in my life and no one should have to actually sit and listen to what I had to say, and she did it anyways, and it was her decision to do that, and she served me because she freaking loved me. And maybe things didn't change in our separation right away, but all of those instances where she showed up for me, and all those instances where we had those deep conversations where some of the times we would we'd be cool with it, and some of the times we would snap and one of us would run out of the house and I'm not talking to you ever again. We block each other on Facebook, on Instagram, on all things. It was everything. It was all things. But what I can say is during the separation, that time of gaining clarity, looking at every piece, being able to start to see that certain things weren't greener than they thought they were, looking at my addiction stuff, looking at the lying, looking at what I was getting from what I had done, looking at the fact that like I knew that Dove and I needed more. We needed tools, we needed coaches to help us. We needed the understanding of what we know now to help us in our journey together. And in the separation, I realized that when we got back together, that we had something to do together. I felt it. I knew it. And to be honest with you, it had nothing to do with the fact that we consider ourselves twin flames. It had nothing to do with anything but that when I am in my divine frequency, this is really important, guys. Not in my lower level frequency, not in my playful frequency. When I am in my divine, my divinity of who the hell I am at soul level, that frequency attracts this woman into my life. And when that polarization happens, there is nothing that you can do to like there was nothing. Like I had to look at it. And then I had to look at myself deeply. Because for me to be with her and stay with her in union, I had to face myself and face her. And ultimately, before all of that, I was facing God.
Thank you. That was like amazing. Okay. So Nick, you started to touch on this, but what were either a single or multiple pivot points that were kind of those moments when you're like, I'm ready to come back into union. I'm ready to try again. Where were those moments for you guys?
It was interesting. So for me, and it was like,
yeah.
When I'm with her, there is nothing but unconditional love. I mean, there's moments where we are human.
Yeah.
And we're not unconditional. There's a lot of those moments. But when it really counts and it matters, there's that unconditional love. And what happened was when I left that space, I got to see the contrast. And I was hanging out with, you know, friends and people that, like, I still have friendships with. I'm not talking about that, but I started to see that the depth of that love was home with her. And that I wasn't getting it, that depth. I'm not saying love, that depth. I couldn't find it anywhere else. I couldn't get that mirror back. My heart is love. I love all things. I love the earth. I love the creatures on the earth. I love humans. I love so hard. Sometimes it hurts. I couldn't see or get that mirrored back to me the way she mirrors that back to me. And I missed it. And I knew that there was something there. I knew that, like, I needed to go home. Yeah.
I think I stayed pretty open the whole time to the concept of, you know, us coming back into a space. I wasn't exactly sure what that space looked like, whether it was a union of a relationship or whether it was, but I kept, you know, and I really want to be clear too that our story, you know, these are specific questions for us about our story. And so this video is a little bit different because it's not the same as me giving you tools and skills and things. It's me and Nicole explaining some of what we went through. So I want you to take what applies for you and leave what doesn't apply for you. It's a different type of video because, you know, for every person, it's not the same. That for me, it felt right. And I was guided to just keep that space open, my heart open, the door open. And so when Nicole would, you know, run through the house like a tornado for 5 minutes, the door was open, and that was good for me and that worked for me. And so I kept the vision, you know, there. I kept this active surrender of how or in what way things were going to look, but I kept the door open. And the reunion process, it's not like a open closed door. You know, our reunion process was like, we were back, but there was ups and downs. Actually, a lot of people ask us a pretty hard question, like, our biggest separation was the most obvious separation. It was almost a year. There was the infidelity and all those things. But we had moments within the union where we also just kind of like pulled away, or there was like a week of something happening, or and so I think that also that fluctuation. But the year after us deciding to be back in the house together still had its work. It was still pretty difficult. And, you know, again, we didn't have the tools that we can now bring other people. We didn't have the clarity that we now share with you. We didn't. And that's why we are dedicated so much to twins and those that don't identify with that path, which is, you know, all the people that we come into contact with to give you the tools that we went through, because I think it was a slower and more brutal process than necessarily needed to be. And there was things we didn't know.
Yeah, it was definitely brutal.
So how do you feel like you were dealing with the emotions that came during the reunion? Like the distrust that still might have been there, the jealousy, the hurt. How did you mend those things?
So when Nicole said that she wanted to get back together, one of my strongest requirements was that I don't hold her hostage. It was like, instead of having a requirement on her, my first requirement, I did have requirements on her, but my first requirement was actually on myself. I said, if I can't get to a point where I am creating trust with you, if I am still saying I get to do this to you in 5 years because you cheated on me, we can't have this relationship. I don't believe that if you want to be back with somebody and things happen in the past, they need to be addressed, they need to be healed, they need to be worked on, you need to create safety. But if you're going to hold that person hostage by bringing that to them down the road, and I said, so whatever I need to do to get to the point where I no longer hold you hostage, I no longer say to you in 2 years or 3 years, whatever, I don't trust you because you did this, I don't, you know. So I immediately started training myself to go back into trust, just kind of like blindly. And you know, there could be judgment around that. It wasn't without clarity that I did that. I was aware of the danger of the repercussion, whatever. But the other thing is that we did have a rocky reunion, and therefore in the rockiness of that reunion, there were still lies and things that came up.
Yeah.
And so intuitively, I also had to listen to my intuition, which was like, hey, this is happening. Hey, this is going on. Hey, that's not cleaned up. Hey. And so it wasn't kind of like just having to deal with no additional challenges. And again, it was me being deeper connected to my intuition. So I knew when things were clear, and some of you are not going to know that necessarily. And I knew when things were not clean, meaning that something was going on. I was able to lock into that pretty easily, to just know, like, I feel good, things are fine. You know, I don't feel good, something's off. But also, Nicole and I then went through this process of new communication. Hey, this, and this is coming up for me. And at the beginning, it took her a little time. As she was saying, she moved into this very, very honest, very transparent person, but it's not an overnight switch. And so that behavior broke down slowly, and then it broke down quicker, and then and so we had to go through this whole progressive process together. And I think that later down the road, I think that it has dissipated in an incredible amount. I really do trust her, and I take her word. And I think that now I am pretty much at a place that I would have been before this. I'm not a very jealous person by nature. But that was my intention. That was my goal. That was my awareness to not, we have to get to a place where you are honest and I am trusting. You know, and that was a requirement for us to do this, because otherwise we were really going to hold each other in a hostage situation that didn't feel good.
Yeah, my process of being honest wasn't there in the beginning. It was, you know, it was something I had used. And so that was one of the most at the time, it was one of the most painful things I ever had to go through, because the fear of actually being honest, and for her seeing me where I'm at and what I was doing, and the confusion. I was feeling a ton of confusion. I didn't trust the situation. I was scared. I was scared of my own behavior. I was scared of what we had already created and what that was going to look like. I would tell you in the beginning, I wasn't fully all in. I had like one foot in, one foot out, and I suffered greatly doing that. But it was something that I needed to go through, because every time I was able to be honest, like every time, it's like your neurochemistry. It's like when we lie, your brain is built like that. You're like, oh, I'm not going to tell the truth. And I'm going to do that. And it's like, you have to come back and tell the truth, and tell the truth, and tell the truth in the most difficult of situations, and work through it, and see her reaction, and like, see her have a meltdown, and then try to have to like deal with the fact that I felt guilty and shameful. And then when I felt guilty and shameful, I wanted to attack, because that's what we do sometimes. And the process of that, working through that, was humbling, and it created a foundation. It created the trust, right? Because then we got to the point where it was like, you know, I would have, you know, been willing to be like, here, you could have all my, she never went on my phone or on my social media, but like, I'm like, you know, because I knew that I was being honest. And the thing about when I finally started to be honest was when I started to house my soul more deeply, and I started to feel more like myself. And I started to feel a freedom. I didn't have any freedom when I was lying. I was always looking over my shoulder. I was always full of guilt. I was not free. I was bound. And, you know, I had to admit that I was a liar. And I had to admit, you know, why, and look at why I started that. And then I had to accept that I didn't want to be like that. And that's not who I was. And then the transformation began with us. And it took a lot of talks. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of mentors. It took a lot of, you know, sweat, blood, and tears. It was definitely an arduous process.
Yeah. Yeah, Nicole makes a good point that we really did sit a lot together, and we would like open up safe space, and we would really dump our stuff, our stories, our questions, our pain. And we put in a lot of work. We put in a lot of work as a team, as a couple, not just with our support and not just with our mentors, but as a team. You know, and I don't know if some of you guys are going to ask this question, or if you have asked this question, but, you know, I wanted to go back a little and say, you know, that the separation was really precipitated by both of our stuff. And I think it's very easy when one party acts out, right? And so Nicole and I, we have a lot of the same, if not all of the same, wounding and thought process and triggers, but we manifest them so differently that they look completely separate, and they're really not. And so she had her way of externally exploding things, and I had an internal implosion, and I was imploding a lot before these things happened. And that implosion was making me really separate and really disconnected and not present and not connected. And it's not about blame. It's not about who's more responsible or not responsible. But I think it's really valuable for you both to be able to see, for any two parties to be able to see, because in fact, it has nothing to do with the relationship. It has to do with you, shorting myself by keeping my focus so on her behavior as being the cause that I wasn't letting myself have any change. Whether that's the relationship you have or isn't the relationship you have, it starts to become irrelevant at the end of the day. It has to do with where you can see and grow in your own experience. So it was easy for me with Nicole's very overt external behavior for me to keep the focus off of myself. And I had to really take the time to keep bringing the focus back on myself the best that I can, which is something that I think that, I still work on, and I think everybody still works on. It's when you go into your pain body and you go into a trigger, it's super easy to go, well, they did this and that's why. I mean, we're still very much human, but we're very, very far away from where we were.
So I know a question that has come up as well for a lot of your followers is they've gone through something similar and they wonder if that kind of ache of, I've heard almost them say ripple of feeling like, oh, this feels familiar. Oh, I don't like how this feels. Does that ever go away? Like, is that ever going to fully be healed with time? Or is it something that is just worked through easier with the tools that you have?
I would say that it feels nearly gone for me. I think that, and the only reason I'm saying nearly and not completely is because we recently had some super weird astrology that brought up stuff that everybody has actually resolved. I think that every once in a while, and also I want to say this because this is pretty relevant for you guys. Nicole and I tend to request like the deeper, dig because of the work we do, right? Yes. We want to serve you guys. And so we're expecting a lot more of ourselves. And we're also expecting a lot. The universe is giving us more and more sort of experience. And so I dive deeper into it. I pay a lot of attention. I don't think that, so other than that, other than like little moments of it's because I have to dig into something, but the sensation is very different. And in terms of, that individual person or anything like that, that is really completed. There isn't trauma. There's no fear there. I don't experience trigger anymore. And, I think that actually the infidelity would be different for me than the actual separation. The separation was very impactful, being actually physically separated away. And that is, and this is a very vulnerable answer because it's very personal, but it was multifaceted. It was not just our relationship that was painful to pull away from. It was what I had felt in my body we were going to be doing. And even though I didn't know, like I would have never in a million years guessed we would be doing what we were doing and what we will be doing. But there was a sense of so much mistake and loss in that. And I think that is something that is a deeper pain for me. And the other stuff has really completed itself. It does take time and it takes a lot of honesty and it takes a lot of care for you to not say like I should be over it or, so on and so forth. And it takes a lot of self-responsibility and work and digging and looking, why is it also hitting you the way it's hitting you? When I started to realize that it wasn't personal, and that's really hard for people to accept. And then I dug into it deeper. So for me, based on what I've seen with clients that don't even have anything to do with twin flame connection, getting over things like molestation, abuse, car accidents, PTSD, so on, there really isn't anything that I don't think we can work all the way through. And, the other thing that people don't get too is if the behavior is still happening, you're going to experience it, right? So if it feels so familiar, but like you're still in the trauma, that's different. You have to pull time away from the trauma. That behavior has to stop in order for you to also pull away from that. Yeah.
For me, it's interesting. As I grow, I look back at this specific time and I revisit it often because as I change and see more of who I really am and then I look back at it, I have a lot of, I have guilt and shame that comes up. I have remorse. It hurts my heart to know that with my addiction stuff, and with that, you know, how much trauma that has caused you. And to see how, you know, every once in a while there'll be you could see the devil go, like if I'm not good, or my wife will go into a fear, and I could feel her start to fear if I'm not good. And I know that that's not just a normal fear. I know that that fear comes from the fact that, like, we went through some stuff. So there are moments where, you know, we hit certain parts, and then I have to revisit my amends within myself and with her. And we'll, you know, I'll grab her sometimes and just be like, hey, I need to tell you I'm sorry again, because I'm seeing it from like another place now and it hurts. And so, you know, I don't go into where I go in guilt and shame anymore, and I'm like, you know, ravaging myself in the home, but it's enough to just peek through the window and go, oof, yeah, that's where you were, man, and you don't ever have to be there again. And so there's also that moment of like, thank you, you know, that I don't have to be there.
You know, if you can't give yourself and your partner compassion to be able to look at your shit and not create guilt and shame and not create abuse, then it really does limit that progress. You know, I don't have any part of me that needs or wants Nicole to feel guilty or shameful for any of the things that we've been through. It's not productive, and it doesn't allow her to, you know, move and shift. And in fact, you know, again, I'm aware of how much stuff we had chose to accumulate in our own individual lives, and our life together, because there was nothing, no stone unturned, right? Like, we didn't want to be able to not help an entrepreneur, or you know, a couple, a individual, a child, whatever it was. We have wanted to be able to touch every area. So our experiences were necessary, they were important. And also, we need to become observers of those experiences so we get the chance to change, because if we're not observing our circumstances, there's no ability to allow ourselves to change them. And most of us don't allow ourselves to observe because we create story and judgment and shame and guilt and fear and all of those things. We attack ourselves, we attack each other. And a lot of the time, you know, and when I would want to attack Nicole, that was also me not being responsible for tending to those really bad pain points in myself. Because I was an active trigger, I was an active pain, and therefore I wanted to attack her. And so that was not a progressive place to be in. So I think that it's a sign of a lot of courage and a lot of commitment to be able to just look back, because any one of us, like, if anyone can sit and say, well, I've never, but we've all done something, though. We've all behaved in some manner. And, you know, it's interesting, because I was speaking to somebody this morning, and I'll say this to you guys, there's no point in ever judging yourself or anyone else, because that person that you're judging, you know, you're either going to be them in the future, you were them in the past, or you are them right now. And so there is really no reason, there's no circumstance or situation that any one of us are exempt from potentially falling into or experiencing in this life. And that's just a human fact that has nothing to do with anything else.
So I deeply honor all of this rawness and vulnerability and openness, and I'm going to say that we love you as everyone who gets to witness you. So thank you for showing up.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And the last thing, and I'll let you wrap it, is what is some advice that you would give to anybody who is in the situation of dealing with infidelity and or separation right now?
That's
yes.
how our baby Eros feels about it.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
I do want to say this, is that I just need to say that, you know, there was never a time where Dove and I weren't seeking to help ourselves. Maybe little moments, right, where I fell apart, right, in my addiction stuff, or like there was moments, but there was never a time where we weren't seeking help or putting in some kind of like wanting to change. And so for some of you, your partner right now doesn't want to change,
right,
and doesn't want to do the work, and doesn't want to look at themselves, and there's nothing that you can do in that moment. And so to say that, I want to say that very specific. I know this is our story, but I was feeling really led that if your partner does not want to show up, does not want to do the work, does not want to change, then you in this moment do not have to sit in that. The only person that you can change, and that is yourself, right? It doesn't mean that you can't be loved. It doesn't mean that you can't do work, you know, whatever, you know, and bring them into your higher purpose work and in that way. But just understand that, like, you don't have to create suffering for yourself, No one's asking you to suffer, right? We're not, it's a choice on where you are in this moment, and you get to choose you, right? Dove and I chose ourselves through this to actually choose each other, right? We had to choose ourselves and choose the walk of like aligning ourselves and really seeking like, ourselves to get to the point of having this. Because without that, there was none of this, and there will never be none of this.
Yeah. Yeah, my advice is definitely to make yourself a priority, to get tribe, to be supported, to connect, to grieve, to look at your stuff, to look at yourself, to, you know, use the information you receive that aligns, you know, to drop what doesn't, to gain tools, to have compassion for yourself, to understand there's no such thing as obligation, to be in your choice, to get to know your choice, to get to know what is right for you, which is not going to be right for the next person. You know, I believe strongly that twins, you know, and this is true for everybody, but we're talking about the twin flame connection. Twins choose the way that they want to engage with their twin in a lifetime. It's not something that was like predetermined by the universe. It's not something that's demanded by God. It's not, it is, you decide we're going to do this lifetime, or we're not even going to be on the same planet in this lifetime. We're not even going to connect in this lifetime. We're going to only connect for 5 minutes in this lifetime, you know. And so I think that, and again, this is something we're going to talk about more. I think that, you know, use the concepts to bring you clarity, and where they don't bring you clarity, you know, don't abandon yourself and your heart, your intuition, your understanding.
Yes.
You know, and don't judge yourself, because we all hold humanness, we all hold weakness, we all hold, you know, and letting yourself to use this experience as an opportunity to look at yourself, where the wounds are, where the need is, attend to that, empower yourself, let yourself break free of ideas and stories. And we thank you guys. We thank you for these, you know, really, really intimate questions.
Yes.
So we, you know, just ask you to understand that this is our story. Sometimes we teach, and sometimes we preach, and sometimes we share. And this is not that. This is our story. This is to bring clarity. This is to answer your questions. We share openly and honestly with you guys, as much as we can expose ourselves. We do, because we hope that it serves you. And so if you guys are new, we welcome you. Take a look around. Make sure that you're connected to us on all our platforms, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and make sure that you follow us and subscribe and like this video if it served you. Share it with others if you feel that it will help. And we will see you guys really soon.
Bye.
Bye, guys.